Have you ever felt really down? Felt like you're so stuck that it doesn't matter what you do, life doesn't seem to get any better. I have found actually that it isn't the circumstances that we're in that is causing us to feel that way. In fact, it's the way we're thinking about those circumstances that is creating the issue for us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that He will never burden us with more than we can bear. And in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find rest. So why is it we feel so challenged when life seems to get us down? There was a time when I felt so uncomfortable, so distressed, unhappy, depressed about myself and my situation, that it felt like I wanted to unzip myself so I could step out of myself. It felt that uncomfortable. SubhanAllah. I was trapped in the past. I just left a marriage. It was an abusive marriage. I'd been in there for, the way I put it, in there. I've been in there for 8 years, 9 years, something like that. And I was I was haunted by some of the experiences I went through. They would play over in my mind. I was also embarrassed or mortified as I started to realize how badly I had started to behave by the end of that time as a result of being in that marriage, subhanAllah. And I was also stuck looking at the future and thinking, there's no hope, because I'm never going to shake this ex of mine. I'm never going to be able to live the life that I dream of, because I was still being harassed and everything, even though I had left. And so I was not in this present moment. I was lost in the past and I was lost in the future. And yet in that moment, I was actually living in a town that people come to and visit during their summer, because it's like a living paradise, subhanAllah. It's a source of bananas and avocados. There's palm trees and lush and green. It never gets too hot and it never gets too cold. So the winters are mild and the summers are mild. And on one side you have long white beaches, and on the other side you have beautiful mountain ranges. And this town is nestled in the middle. Beautiful town. And that's where I was living. And I couldn't appreciate it, because I was not living in this moment. I was stuck with all the thinking of the past. I was stuck with all the thinking about the future. And all I could see was doom and gloom and feel really unhappy and uncomfortable in myself. So alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't leave me there. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He does not change the condition within a person until they change the condition within themselves, I was actively seeking help. I was getting help for my physical and emotional well-being. At that stage, not my spiritual. There were no Muslims in the town that I was in, so I wasn't getting much in the way of spiritual. But at that stage, what I needed to do was actually piece myself back together. I had completely shut down emotionally by the end of that marriage, and physically, I was at the point where my doctor was worrying that I actually could die. And I was quite young. I was in my, probably mid to early 30s at that stage. So pretty young to be almost dying, right? So that's, the state I was in. But I took action. I changed the condition within myself, even though I felt so badly. I knew I had to change something within me for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to change my situation. And the interesting thing is, over the years, what I came to discover, leading to where I am now, is that it was never about changing my circumstances. It was always about changing what was within me. That the more I changed within myself, the more I changed the way I look at things, the way I perceive what's happening, the differently I experienced them. And so today, my ex hasn't changed, And he still does really dumb stuff to my kids. Yeah, they're much older now, so it's much easier to deal with in that respect. But on the other side of the coin, I didn't have any reaction to it anymore, because I saw him for who he was. I saw him as a very insecure person. Bullies are insecure people, and abusers are basically bullies, right? Underneath all that abuse is insecurity. And when you see that insecurity, you see that person for what they really are, who they really are. In fact, you feel compelled to make dua that Allah guides them, because you have such pity for their existence. And so he could be today as abusive towards me as he would like. And it would be as if I have a raincoat on and the water is running off me. It would not sink in. It would not affect me. Subhanallah, alhamdulillah. And it's all changed by my perception, the way I see it, the way I'm thinking about what I'm going through. Now, I know this because it's not that my life has got any easier. I still go through lots of very difficult challenges. And, Allah doesn't burden a soul beyond what it can bear. As you become more resilient, right? You can bear more. So the challenges actually get tougher, right? Just like the prophets and messengers were challenged and tested more than anyone, because they were the best of creation. The closer we get to Allah, the more tests we're going to experience. So it's not that life has got any less chaotic. In fact, in some ways, I'm sure it's more chaotic. But my state of mind is calm despite the chaos. And it all comes through thinking about it from a different perspective. That there's a different way of looking at it, a different way of seeing it. And that it's not the circumstances or the things or the people around me that are creating the way I feel. It's the way I think about all of that creates the way I feel. So I'm going to give you an interesting example I was reminded of just yesterday, actually, which just a completely different example to show you how we create our own experience. So about 3 years ago, I was talking to the beautiful Sister Manal, may Allah have mercy on her soul. She has left us now. And she was talking about staycations. And staycations are where you go on a vacation in your own area, right? And talked about how this was a way of just really having an opportunity to wind down, defuse, reconnect with yourself, chill out. And it sounded beautiful. So I did a staycation. 7 minutes drive from my home. And I created the entire experience in my own head, because where I went was a place that we would visit at least once a week. So it was somewhere very familiar. There wasn't anything foreign about it. There wasn't anything new or interesting or intriguing about it. It was the same place I visited every week. But this time I parked probably about 6 or so blocks away from where I was going to hang out. I put a backpack on my back with my water bottle and all the things I needed for my day, the book to read, all that sort of thing, just as I would if I was a traveler, if I was a tourist. And I walked into town. So I parked where you could presume it'd be like if I was a backpacker or something, I was staying in a backpacking place, because I used to backpack when I was young. That's why that came to my mind. And walked my way into town. And I had this beautiful day where I sat by the beach, drinking my water, reading my book. Then I went to the coffee shop and had a lovely coffee and just watched people walking past and quietly thinking about life in general, not stressing about anything. Then I went off and had the lunch, and I ate what I felt like eating, not accommodating to all the family. And I just went through this whole day of my kids happened to be away that day, so I could take the whole day. It was about 8 or 9 hours in total. Just wandering up the street, popping into the shops, going, oh yeah, that's interesting, noticing things that I'd walked past many times and never really noticed. Just totally enjoyed the day. And then at sunset, I walked along the beach because the sun sets over the beach here, so it's beautiful watching the sun setting over the beach. And as I walked along the beach back towards my car, the sun was setting. And then I drove home to pray my group, right, because home's 7 minutes away. Very calm, very relaxed. And it really felt like I was a tourist. Even though I was in a place that I knew and was very familiar, the whole experience was that of being a tourist. Now, the interesting thing is, the very next day, my husband said, let's go down to our favorite coffee shop, the one that I had my coffee at, because it was a sort of thing that we would often do as a family. So as a family, we went down there and had coffees, or the kids had shakes and things like that. And it was a completely different experience. It was the same old regular hanging out at the coffee shop experience. So it was the same coffee. It was the same coffee shop in the same street, in the same place, right? But my experience of it was completely different because of my way of thinking about it. So I know that isn't talking about being depressed or down or unhappy. I just wanted to give you an example that sits outside of that, so that you're not sitting there going, oh yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but. Because if I was talking about actually when we're down, you would have in your mind naturally all the reasons why it wouldn't work for you. So I'm telling you, even though you're probably thinking, oh yeah, but that wouldn't work for me, is that it does. And it works for everybody, because this is how we are as human beings. We are always experiencing our thought in the moment. We're always having feelings we're always feeling our thoughts. So we're always experiencing our life through thought in the moment. So we, in fact, are the ones in creating our experience. We are not the ones that are creating our circumstance. That is Allah. This is the qadr of Allah that is happening around us. And Allah is the one in control of that, not us. And if we think the answers are to resolve things outside of us, like make that relationship better, or fix this work scenario, or fix our financial situation, or have our children in a particular, behaving a particular way, or achieving certain things, then we're looking in the wrong place for where our feelings of well-being come from. Our feelings of well-being come from the having thoughts that are good thoughts. So let's go back to in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find rest. And let me share you another story, one where most people would feel that I should have. See, we have all these ideas how we should experience things. When I lost my child, and the experience you would expect me to have is one of really deep grief, right? And I'm not saying I didn't grieve, but I didn't sink into any kind of deep grief or depression, and I have never since either. And let me share with you the story about Sarah. So Sarah was born in 2018. At 13 weeks, I had some little spot bleeding, and I made dua because I'd had a few miscarriages before. I made dua to Allah. I said, oh Allah, I know my husband really wants this child, save this child. Usually I would say, oh Allah, do what's best and make me accept what is best, right? But I made a specific dua that day, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved her, meaning that she didn't leave us at that 13-week mark. Even though when I went in for an ultrasound, they could see where the bleeding was happening, and they believed it was the beginning of a miscarriage. At the 19-week ultrasound, we were hustled into an interview room, and all these specialists and everybody came to join us to tell us what was really going on with her. She had spina bifida. They could tell from the scans. She had no kidneys, which means she wasn't, the amniotic fluid actually is something that is created through the urine of the baby in utero. And so that meant the amniotic fluid, wasn't developing in there. So there was only a little bit of fluid between her and I. So it was a very uncomfortable pregnancy because there was nothing between me and her elbows and knees, right? So imagine her, well, she was feet first all the time. Imagine her feet in my bladder all the time. I'm sure those of you who've had children get what I'm talking about. So she was going to be born to die. And, subhanAllah, my body was meant to send her away peacefully at 13 weeks, but Allah preserved her. I made dua. Allah answered my dua and saved her. And there was such beauty in this whole experience, actually. So from 19 weeks onwards, we still had hope, but there were lots of scans. Her heart wasn't developing properly because her lungs weren't developing properly, because everything develops in conjunction with the other. The lungs weren't developing properly because there wasn't the amniotic fluid for them to develop properly. So there was a whole domino effect. And they said that there was absolutely zero chance that she could survive. So we went along, and they expected the pregnancy wouldn't last. In fact, they wanted many students to come and see me as a case because this particular case lasted so long. Like, we went not to full term. They weren't ever going to let me go to full term because with the spina bifida, she was paralyzed from the waist down, which meant she never moved. And it also means the head gets really big, which means it was going to be like giving birth to a pin. So very sort of thin body with this big head. And that wasn't going to be possible, especially having already had a cesarean before. They weren't even going to allow me to try and give birth to her naturally. So we had to book it all in. There was still this thread of hope in me that maybe she'll be okay. But I was worried that we were having her too early and we weren't giving her a chance to suddenly be okay. And really beautifully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieved that thought in my mind, because the day that I was meant to go in for the cesarean, or I actually went in for the cesarean to have her little foot actually came out through my cervix. So she was going to come out that day, even if we hadn't booked it in. And so that gave me this beautiful sense of this was meant to be. So all the time through this, I had been learning about children and what happens when they die, and and I was learning about how if they die before puberty, they are playing with Ibrahim alayhi salam under a big green tree, and how on the day of judgment they call their parents, call to Allah that their parents enter Jannah. And I started to look at this child as, what, this is my only child that I have any guarantees that she will enter Jannah. I don't know if any of my other kids will. And so that thought, in the remembrance of Allah here, do hearts find rest, I felt so much comfort. Then the other thing that came to my mind was Allah burdens the soul not beyond what it can bear. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that if I had this child and she survived, that she was going to be 24/7 hands-on care. She was never going to be toilet trained. She was never going to be able to feed herself. She was going to be always wheelchair bound. That she would live as the essence of a person, but without the ability to do anything. And who knows how much brain function she would have had. And I had a friend at the time who had a 33-year-old daughter who had some other type of problem that was like this. Always, basically, she was a 2-year-old at 33, still in nappies, still needing to be fed. And I thought about that and I thought, I don't think I could manage a life like that. So I started to feel really, really grateful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed me with this opportunity to have a child that would go straight to Jannah without me having to do the hard work. And that despite the fact that this child had so many disabilities, that I would never have to actually have the burden of taking care of that disability. And so I went into having her with so much gratitude. And the nursing staff, they set everything up for us. We had only women present apart from my husband. We had the Quran playing in the background. My husband was telling me the stories of the Prophet ﷺ to keep me distracted as the operation was going on, and probably to keep him distracted too because he can't stand blood, right? She was born. He did the sunnah of her with the adhan in her ear and all those sorts of things. My kids and my parents were in a room right nearby, ready, so that they could start spending time with her in the few moments that we would have with her while she was alive. She was born alive. And they were all getting a cuddle while they quickly finished stitching me up and getting me ready to come in and join them. By the time Thoraya, who was about 18 months old at the time, started to get restless and it was clear it was time to go, they put her back in my arms. And as everybody was walking out the door, I felt her soul leaving. It was really quite astonishing. And the nurse came over and said, "Oh, I'm going to come and do her vitals." And I said to her, "I don't think you're going to find anything." Now, we couldn't really see she was breathing because her breathing was so shallow, it wasn't really obvious. So the nurse checked her vitals and she was gone. The next 3 days, I was in hospital for 4, but for the next 3 days, I was in hospital. People came to visit me. I shared with them the story. We all cried together and they left. The same thing happened over and over and over again for 3 days. Remember, we're meant to grieve for 3 days and then on day 4, get back into our life. Day 4, I woke up and I was like, I'm ready to get back to my life. And I was saying to the nurses, can I go home? But I needed to stay another day for them to make sure the wound and everything was all okay from the cesarean. And so I was like a caged lion that day, pacing the room, desperate to go home, even though I was, in pain and all the other things. I just wanted to be back home and get on with my life. And I have never, if I sometimes really take myself back to that moment when her soul left, I can feel tears and feel a little bit of sadness, but I've never felt anything deeper than that little sadness when I've had those thoughts. I've never looked back and been depressed about that. More of the blessings of that experience were that the imam came up to the hospital and washed and shrouded her, and so the nursing staff got to witness that, and we got police clearance to take her for her janazah prayer the same day. So she was allowed to be driven in a personal car. Usually it has to be the laws here mean it has to be in a special vehicle for these sorts of things, but no, she was allowed to be carted to the mosque, and she was buried by 4:00 that afternoon. And the nurses came and they said to me, it was so beautiful to know as I drove home from my shift that she was already at rest. They really saw the beauty in our Islamic funeral process. And so subhanAllah, her life was such an incredible, beautiful experience. So the expectation is that I shouldn't have experienced it like that, because at a similar time there were other sisters who went through the same thing, and 2 to 3 years later were struggling still, depressed about having lost this child. And yet, because my whole experience was done through the remembrance of Allah, my heart was at rest the whole time. When I cried those tears with the people that came to visit me, those tears were calm tears. They weren't wailing or desperate tears. They were very calm tears, very healing tears. And it really shows me why when somebody dies, you go and visit those that are grieving, to give them that opportunity to have that connection with someone and cry those healing tears in that moment. So subhanAllah, my experience of that came through the way I thought about it. And I wanted to actually unpack that for you in detail so that you could really understand how our thoughts are what we are experiencing. It's not what's happening that we're experiencing. So no matter how down you're feeling, no matter how stuck you're feeling, no matter how low you're feeling in your life and feel like it's been like this for so long, there is hope. I want you to take away only one thing, more if you want, but the one thing I truly want you to take away from this video is that there is hope. When your thoughts change, not your circumstances, when your thoughts change, when something inside you changes, then Allah changes your circumstances. Allah does not change the circumstance for a person until they change the circumstances within themselves. So, dear sisters, do not despair. If you really are in a difficult space, please reach out. Whichever means you can reach out, I'm here. But don't be discouraged. There is hope, and it takes taking one step at a time, putting one foot in front of the other, inshallah.